Well, good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all once again. We're in the Psalms, as you see tonight, and we're going to look at one of the Psalms of David. We've called it a Psalm of Restoration, where David is praying to be restored from the terrible situation that he's in. And that's what we shall be seeing as we go along. First of all, just an overview of the Psalm. The first 4 verses, and we just read the Psalm, is David in distress, isn't it? Verse 3, for example, the enemy hath persecuted my soul. He hath smitten my life down to the ground. He hath made me to dwell in darkness as those that have been long dead. And then we've got verse 5, which is the turning point in this psalm. Verse 5, David says, I remember the days of old. I meditate on all thy works. I muse on the work of thy hands. And we shall see as we go through tonight the importance of meditating on the word of God. And it was David's meditation on God's works of old that brought him out of the terrible situation that he was in. So there we've got meditation on God's past works. And then the third part of the psalm, verses 6 to 12, is a prayer. David's prayer of deliverance. And what we will do, of course, is to look at each of these in a little bit of detail. Psalm 107 is a psalm of David. Then they cried unto the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them, we note, out of their distresses. It doesn't say he saved them from their distresses, but he saved them out of their distresses, because the distresses were necessary, a necessary part in moulding their characters. Right, so that's an overview of the psalm. And there's another, Psalm 40, which is a psalm of David, once again, also messianic, as many of David's psalms are. He brought me up out of an horrible pit and set my feet upon a rock. And that's what God did for David, and he did it also for the Lord Jesus Christ. So what's the background to this psalm? It's obviously some incident in the life of David. There are 2 suggestions. One of them is that it was at the time of Absalom's rebellion. The second is that it was at the time when he was fleeing from Saul and from his persecution. Those who go for number 1 say, well, verse 2, enter not into judgment with thy servant, for in thy sight shall no man living be justified. That's David acknowledging his guilt over the Bathsheba incident. But we say, is it that, or is it just a general comment from David acknowledging that no one justly deserves deliverance from death? No one justly deserves the mercy of God. And I personally feel that that's what that verse is saying. I feel it's when we come to verse 3, the enemy hath persecuted my soul. And we say, well, did David see Absalom, his son, as his enemy? Just turn to 2 Samuel 18. To see what David says about Absalom there. So 2 Samuel chapter 18, and this of course is during the time of Absalom's rebellion. And at verse 5, this is David speaking to Joab. And the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. Deal gently with Absalom. Doesn't sound too much like an enemy, does it? So we've got a contrast there. Now, I feel it's aptly describing the way in which Saul pursued after David. And I want to just very quickly run through some of the incidents during that period to see that. But we say here, of course, that the psalm is relevant to any situation where there is need of deliverance from distress and from despair. So, David and Saul. If we turn to 1 Samuel chapter 18, 1 Samuel chapter 18, and it's the root cause of the problem between Saul and David. This, of course, is after David had killed Goliath. And verse 7 of that chapter says, "And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him." And he says, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me have they ascribed but thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. And we read in the next few verses how that suddenly David, who was a favourite of Saul, became his enemy. And the root cause really was jealousy in the mind of Saul, which caused this. We read in that, we won't go through all the verses, but twice on those occasions, Saul tries to kill David. He smites him with a spear in the hope that and David escapes out of his sight. So that's the beginning of this sorry saga between David and Saul. Chapter 18 and verse 17. Saul tries another ploy. Saul said to David, "Behold, my elder daughter Merab, her will I give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul said, "Let not mine hand be upon him, but the hand of the Philistines." Because what Saul required was the death of some of the Philistines. So he was thinking, well, let's try and get rid of David that way. So that's example number 2. Chapter 19 and verse 11. We read there, "Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And David's wife told him, saying, If thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow shalt thou be slain." And we know what happened, how that Michal saved David on that occasion. But it was Saul's intention to kill him. Right, let's try that method. Do it in his own home. Okay, turn over another page or so to chapter 20. 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 20 verse 1. David fled from Naioth in Ramah, because Saul was pursuing him, and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is mine iniquity? And what is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life?" And Jonathan said to him, "God forbid, thou shalt not die. Behold, my father will do nothing, either great or small, but that he will show it to me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." Jonathan didn't believe it, and we don't have time to consider the wonderful character of Jonathan in these things. But what does David say at verse 3? David swore moreover and said, "Thy father certainly knoweth that I have found grace in thine eyes." And he saith, "Let not Jonathan know, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, there is but a step between me and death." So that's the way that David could perceive the situation at that time. A step between me and death. Right, turn over to chapter 22. Chapter 22 and verse 1. David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So he was on the run from Saul, and he escaped to this cave. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And every one that was in distress, and every one that was in debt, and every one that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them. So David here in the cave is a captain over these people who were discontented, who were in distress. We can't help drawing the comparison between David and his 400 men and Saul and his 3,000 chosen men. Just turn over to chapter 24. And verse 1. It came to pass when Saul was returned from following the Philistines that it was told him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of Engedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. 3,000 chosen men, the elite of the army of Israel, Saul was using to pursue one man, David. And that's how twisted Saul was, really. He was prepared to use all those men to destroy David. Right, 1 Samuel 22 and at verse 12. 1 Samuel 22 and at verse 12. We read there, Saul said, Hear now, thou Ahitub. This is a priest. And he answered, Here am I, my lord. And Saul said unto him, Why have ye conspired against me, thou and the son of Jesse, in that thou hast given him bread and a sword, and hast inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me, to lie in wait, as at this day? And if we had time, we could read what Saul did at this stage. He actually destroyed all the priests. Get rid of them all, just in case. We don't want anything like that to happen again. So Saul was prepared to destroy 85 priests. And of course, one escaped, didn't they? And David looked after that one. Right, so finally in this saga, go to chapter 23 and start at verse 19. Then came up the Ziphites to Saul, to Gibeah, saying, Doth not David hide himself with us in the strongholds, in the wood, in the hill of Achilah, which is on the south of Jeshimon? Now therefore, O king, come down according to all the desires of thy soul, to come down, and our part shall be to deliver him into the king's hand. So these Ziphites knew where David was. And they were saying to Saul here, we'll show you exactly where he is. And the next verse tells us something about Saul's character. Verse 21. Saul said, Blessed be ye of the Lord, for ye have compassion on me. Saul was feeling sorry for himself. Ye have compassion on me. And Saul says, very well, you guide me to where he is. And that's what happened. And if we drop down to verse 25 of that chapter, read there, Saul also and his men went to seek him. And they told David, therefore he came down into a rock and abode in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard that, he pursued after David in the wilderness of Maon. And Saul went on this side of the mountain, and David and his men on that side of the mountain. And David made haste to get away for fear of Saul. For Saul and his men compassed David and his men round about to take them. So this was it as far as both David and Saul were concerned. Saul had got him. The spider had caught the fly, as it were, because David described himself as a flea, didn't he? So that's the situation which I suspect is the background to this psalm. That's why David voiced the things that we read in the first part of this psalm. So let's go back to the psalm now. Verse 3. We've read it already, but let's read it again. The enemy hath persecuted my soul. He hath smitten my life down to the ground. He hath made me to dwell in darkness, or in hiding, as those that have been long dead. That's the situation that David was in at this time. He was persecuted by Saul in so many different ways. That word persecuted means to pursue ardently. Saul was absolutely determined he would leave no stone unturned until he got rid of David. Such was his hatred for him. He has smitten my life down to the ground, David says. We didn't read the verse in 1 Samuel 18, but twice Saul literally cast a javelin at David and said, I will smite him even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence. He hath made me to dwell in darkness or in hiding, as those that have been long dead. And again, that's what the situation was. David was constantly on the run, and the latter part of what we're considering, he was on the run in the wilderness of Maon. So we come to verse 4. Therefore is my spirit overwhelmed within me. We make the point that David had been pursued for months, possibly years, by Saul, and it was getting to him, as we would say nowadays. He couldn't take it any longer. His spirit was overwhelmed within him. The word means to be wrapped in darkness, to languish, to faint. I know we sometimes think that what David, he put his trust in God, but it wasn't always just as easy as that, was it? And it wasn't at this time. My spirit is overwhelmed within me. My heart within me is desolate. The word means to be disheartened. And if we look in a modern dictionary, that means having lost determination or confidence, to be dispirited. So David was at rock bottom, really, wasn't he? We say, what does he do? And that's where verse 5 comes in. This is where the meditation comes in. I remember the days of old. I meditate on thy works. I muse on the work of thy hands. David begins to meditate on the scriptures that he knew. Up to 1 Samuel, for example. Did he remember Israel at the Red Sea? Similar situation, really. Israel at the Red Sea were trapped with the sea on one side, Pharaoh and his hosts on the other side. Just turn back to Exodus. Two interesting contrasts here. Exodus 15 to begin with, which speaks about the way in which Pharaoh was pursuing the nation of Israel. Exodus 15 and at verse 9. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil, my lust shall be satisfied upon them, I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. And what happened? He couldn't even pursue, could he? We know what happened, how that Pharaoh and his hosts were destroyed at that time. But as far as Israel was concerned, it looked as though their number was up, we might say. They were trapped between the sea and Pharaoh and his army. Just go back to Exodus chapter 6, which actually comments on the same time, but this time from the point of view of the Almighty. Exodus chapter 6 and verse 6. Wherefore say unto the children of Israel, I Yahweh. We note that am is in italics there. It's not in the original. I am Yahweh. I am he who will be. And see what follows. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rid you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with a stretched out arm and great judgments. I will take you to me for a people. I will be to you a God, and ye shall know that I am the Lord your God, which bringeth you from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land concerning the which I did swear to give it to Abram, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for an inheritance. I am he who will be. What a contrast. You see, Pharaoh was, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, and nothing. But we see here God's purpose with the nation of Israel, just encapsulated it in these 2 or 3 verses. I will, I will, I will. And David could think about these things at that time. He says, I meditate on all thy works. So not just Israel at the Red Sea. What about Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah? The angels were sent to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. But first, they had to rescue just Lot, who was vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked, the New Testament tells us. What about Jacob? What did Jacob say at the end of his life? The angel which redeemed me from all Israel, from all evil, bless the lads. So Jacob at the end of his life, who had just said to the king, to Pharaoh, few and evil have been my days. But he was able to say to Joseph, but the angel redeemed me out of all evil. And then there was Joseph himself. We consider how Joseph was treated, first of all by his brethren, and then how he was sold into Egypt and what happened to him there. And what's Joseph's comment at the end of all this, when he makes himself known to his brethren? You see, they were devastated at this point. And Joseph says, fear not. God did send me before you to preserve life. God's hand was in all this, as it always is. Whatever happens to us in this life, God is always there. And we'll come back to that later on. David says, I muse on the work of thy hands. That word, according to Gesenius, means to meditate, to speak to anyone, to sing of all God's wonderful works. We've done it already, haven't we? Praise my soul, the King of heaven, to his feet thy tribute bring. Ransomed, healed, restored, forgiven, evermore his praises sing. And so that hymn goes on. We've sung, haven't we, at the amazing mercy and grace of our God. David says, my soul thirsteth after thee, as a thirsty land. There's the wilderness of Maon, even as it is today. Indeed, a thirsty land. And we've read, haven't we, how that in the wilderness of Maon, Saul went on this side of the mountain, and David and his men on that side of the mountain. So here we've got Saul with his 3,000 chosen men, and here we've got David with his 400 discontented and men who were dispirited. And we read, didn't we, how that David made haste to get away for fear of Saul. For Saul and his men had compassed, had surrounded David and his men round about to take them. So Saul is now completely surrounding David and his men. It's a similar situation to the nation of Israel at the Red Sea, isn't it? No way out, humanly speaking. And I suspect it was a situation like this, where Saul had only just got to move into the kill, that David penned this psalm, his meditation strengthened his faith in God to save him. David was such a man that he could do that. He had the resources to understand how God had worked in the past, and that brought faith back to David. So we come to the third part of the psalm, David's prayer, starting at verse 7. So just going back to the psalm, and if we go to verse 7, David says, "Hear me speedily, O Lord, my spirit faileth. Hide not thy face from me, lest I be like unto them that go down into the pit. Cause me to hear thy loving kindness in the morning, for in thee do I trust. Cause me to know the way wherein I should walk, for I lift up my soul unto thee. Deliver me, O Lord, from mine enemies. I flee unto thee to hide me. Teach me to do thy will, for thou art my God. Thy spirit is good. Lead me into the land of uprightness. Quicken me, O Lord, for thy name's sake. For thy righteousness' sake, bring my soul out of trouble." And if we just very quickly analyse that prayer of David, I put it on the screen there. David says, first of all, hear me. And then he says, verse 8, cause me to hear. Then he says, cause me to know. Deliver me. Teach me. Lead me. Quicken me. So David is not just praying to God to be saved, a lot more than that. You see, David was a man after God's own heart. Now, if we add the corollary to all those statements, hear me speedily, for hide not thy face from me. This is not a prayer about David. This is a prayer about God, actually, and the way in which he works. Cause me to hear, for in thee do I trust, David says. Cause me to know the way. I lift up my soul to thee. Deliver me. I will flee unto thee to hide me. Teach me to do thy will, for thou art my God. Lead me into the land of uprightness, for thy spirit is good. So at every turn in this prayer of David, God is there in his mind. Quicken me, O Lord, for thy name's sake. Why? For I am thy servant. David was indeed God's servant. And this is why he could pray in this way. I suppose there's exhortation for us, isn't there? We don't just pray to God when things go wrong. Our prayer and our praise of God should be every day and regularly. Let's just come back to David and his men, surrounded by Saul in the wilderness of Maon. Because the very next verse tells us, there came a messenger to Saul, saying unto thee, come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. That word messenger is the word malak. It sometimes refers to an angel, sometimes a human messenger. Either ways, it was a messenger from God, wasn't it? And this seemingly impossible situation that David was in suddenly melts. Saul has got to get on with another job. The Philistines have invaded the land, and so Saul and his men retreat. And what have we got left? David and his men, able to literally just walk away from the situation that they were in. Such is the providence of a God. So we're saying here, meditation and prayer results in positive things. Even though a situation might appear anything but positive. We looked at those things, didn't we? And let's just try and apply it to our own selves. Hear me, that's praying to the Father. Cause me to hear, that's reading and meditating on his word. results in deliverance from evil, whatever that evil might be. Teach me. Learning of God and his purpose and being led by his word results in salvation. Maybe a temporary salvation in this life, but ultimately the salvation. He will swallow up death in victory, and the Lord God will wipe away all tears from all faces, and the rebuke of his people shall he take away from off the earth, for the Lord has spoken it. So there's the exhortation and the comfort for us, isn't it, in this particular situation that David found himself in. Whatever situation we are in, we know that God is always with us. David concludes, for thy name's sake, for thy righteousness' sake. If not for my sake, David is saying, for thy sake, O Lord, that people might know that thou only art God. Another Psalm of David. Thou hast turned for me my mourning into dancing. Thou hast put off my sackcloth and girded me with gladness. Why? To the end that my glory may sing praise to thee. And be not silent, O Lord my God, I will give thanks unto thee forever. And we see that that is totally in line with the purpose of God, isn't it? To fill the earth with his glory. And that's what God's purpose is, to fill the earth with his glory. And he's called us to be part of that. And there are times when we have to be chastened so that we might be in a fit state when the King returns to do just that. What does David say? One thing have I desired of the Lord, and that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. That's it, as far as David was concerned. That is priority number one, all the time. One thing have I desired, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. I think David wasn't just thinking about a literal house, but the spiritual house, the spiritual temple of which we are a part. So just as we draw our thoughts to a conclusion, we say that this was a necessary experience to mould the character of David. And if we can try and apply it to our own situation, there are times when we too are in difficult circumstances, and it is always for our good. I suspect Psalm 119 was written by David. We can't be sure of that. But what do we read there? Before I was afflicted, I went astray. But now have I kept thy word. It is good for me that I have been afflicted, that I might learn thy statutes. So if we've got faith, acknowledging that the difficulties that sometimes come into our lives are ultimately for our good, as it was in the wilderness for the nation of Israel, how that God led them through the wilderness, wherein were fiery scorpions and so on, that he might do them good at their latter end. And that is always God's purpose, to do us good at our latter end. These tests sometimes come as a test of faith. And I suppose Abram is a typical example there. If we turn to Hebrews chapter 11, that well-known chapter of faith. So many examples here, but just look at Abram. Hebrews 11 and verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he that had received the promise offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. What an agonizing time that must have been for Abram, for those 3 days when he journeyed to Mount Moriah. His faith was tested. Verse 19 says, he accounted that God was able to raise him even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. So Abram believed in the resurrection of the dead, and he was prepared to show that belief by what he did, by offering up his only begotten son. And we know that at the last minute he was prevented from doing that. The third reason is to make us fit to enter the kingdom. So let's just go to Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, we know the words well. We know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Now, there are times when we have to show our faith in what is written in that verse. All things work together for good. Even if, like Abram, it means offering up this sacrifice or being prepared to offer up the sacrifice. Abram knew it was for his ultimate good. We could have looked at the example of Moses, couldn't we, in Hebrews 11. He chose to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, because he knew what was what. He knew that God's purpose was eternal, and even if it meant suffering, as it did for Moses, think about the work that Moses had to do. 40 years in the wilderness learning to be a shepherd, and another 40 years leading the children of Israel, that rabble through the wilderness, who were always moaning and complaining. But Moses chose to do that because he knew what the end result was. It was Moses who said to the children of Israel, all these commandments are for your good. So there it is again, always for our good. Just in conclusion, then, let's turn to Revelation, the book of Revelation, and chapter 7. And verse 14, partway through the verse. And here we've got one of those glorious kingdom visions that John sees in this prophecy. And those who were standing before the throne, these are they which came out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. They came out of great tribulation. The word actually means pressure to conform to this world. It was Paul that said, wasn't it, to the elders at Ephesus, we must, through much tribulation, enter the kingdom. So there it is again. These tribulations and difficulties are sometimes necessary, and they are put in our lives because God wants us to be in his kingdom. He wants us to be there, and that's why they were there. They came out of great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore are they before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple. And he that sitteth on the throne shall dwell among them, and they shall hunger no more after righteousness, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them nor any heat, for the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them and lead them unto living fountains of waters, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes.